All right, here we are, hour number 2 on the Monday after the NFL Draft. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you. And joining us for the final time before his long-awaited summer break, Greg Cosell, senior producer from NFL Films, to chop up this draft class with us. And, Greg, do you have your flip-flops and beach towel ready?
No, I do not. But, I'm hoping you guys have all your grades for every team in the draft.
Oh, heck no. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. I know.
Me neither.
Yeah, I know Manny and I spoke to you on our live stream on Friday night after, Keon Coleman went off the board first to the Bills. But I wanted to bounce this off you because if you look at the last 4 receivers acquired by the Bills, just looking at draft and then, Justin Shorter from last year's draft,
sure.
Mac Hollins in free agency this year, now Keon Coleman. We just got confirmation that they signed Quintez Cephus, who is admittedly a back-of-the-roster receiver, but another...
I guess they like big receivers, huh?
Another guy with a basketball background. But there is a definitive theme here, Greg, in the type of receiver they've been looking for of late, and I know that they have separators on the roster already in the form of Kincaid, Shakir, Samuel. What do you think this signals about what they're looking to do with all this size they're trying to add?
A great question, because all these guys are big, and some of them can run, some of them can't. Cephus, it's funny, Cephus was a really interesting guy to me. I think he came out of Wisconsin, and he did not run well at all. But when he got an opportunity, he actually made catches, and he moved better on the field than he did in a 40 time. He hasn't played in a bit. It'll be interesting. But clearly, they've decided they want to go big. I don't know what that means, Brownie, as far as the style of offense. I mean, Joe Brady is now here for a full offseason, so he can put in things he wants to do, whereas last year it's tough to really do that in the middle of a season. You can make a tweak here and there, as we're looking at Cephus. But I'm really curious what that means. I mean, he had big physical receivers at LSU. He had Jefferson. He had Chase, who's very physical. He just may like those kinds of receivers. And, the other interesting thing is last year, what did we see a lot of when Joe Brady took over? A lot of quick game, short throws, right?
Yeah.
And big receivers, they make those catches, and there's a physicality that's required in those kinds of throws. So maybe that's the thought process. I don't think we'll know until we get really to training camp.
Yeah, I want to take that one step further because I've seen it written. I don't know that I necessarily believe it, but I've seen it written that if there's one thing in Joe Brady's background that he doesn't do all that often is scheme receivers open. So could that be maybe part and parcel as to why size has now become a priority, guys who can quote-unquote win even if they're not necessarily open?
And, that's an interesting comment. I read that too. I certainly haven't studied Joe Brady in great detail, in all his stops. I mean, when I looked at LSU the year in 2019, I was looking, more at the players as opposed to breaking down the exact scheme. But he was also with Sean Payton, who does a really good job of scheming receivers open.
Yeah.
So I have to believe, guys, that's in his background somewhere.
Right.
That somewhere along the line, he knows how to do that. Now, again, we don't know until we get to training camp, really, and start playing games exactly what his pass game is going to look like. But if that's the consensus and if there is truth to that, then having big receivers is certainly an advantage.
One of the things about these draft grades that come out right after is most of the grades really are swayed by the top couple of picks.
Sure.
Yeah, Atlanta's getting crushed for taking a quarterback after signing Kirk Cousins, and now their whole draft class stinks. Well, Mike Penix is a good player, and he may not be playing this year, but the rest of their draft class should have something to say about how their draft class is. But they're not doing it that way, right? So let me give it to you. Talk about the first Bills couple of draft picks, Keon Coleman and Cole Bishop.
Yeah, well,
what do you think about the headline?
Coleman the other night? And just to get back to him, I think Coleman, there's a lot to unlock with Coleman. I went back and forth on him watching his tape. There were times I really liked him and other times I was uncertain. I wouldn't call him sudden in his movement. I wouldn't say he's a burner. You'd probably say his play speed is above average, but he's not really a burst or second gear guy. He certainly has good hands. He can make those crowded environment catches. And those, again, that gets back to the big receivers. I think that his size and his overall traits profile would suggest that he's a boundary X type receiver, the single receiver to the short side of the field. I finished my evaluation when I typed my transition saying that my sense is there is more to unlock with Coleman, and there's no question there's a looseness within his body that's there to be developed. So I kind of felt like there's a lot more there. And bottom line is, when you're talking about, the first pick in the second round, and they obviously feel the same way. I'm sure a lot of people felt they shouldn't have passed on other receivers, but we don't know what their draft board looks like, and that's easy to say from the outside. I don't do that because, I don't know what their board looks like, and guys that work at this all year round, I figure that they have a pretty good sense of what they're doing, which doesn't mean you get everything right. No one does. It's impossible. But that's what Coleman is. He's a big guy, and his vertical jump was off the charts. We'll see, but he's a big physical guy, and he obviously likes certain kinds of coach, which we found out in his press conference.
That's right. Macy should get on the phone with him tomorrow. I'll
tell you the guy I loved if you want to go further here.
Well, let's quickly touch on Bishop. Good size safety. Played a lot more near the line of scrimmage, as evidenced by his tackles for loss total, and used as a run blitzer and a pass blitzer.
Yeah, one of my favorite guys in the draft, by the way. I love Cole Bishop. I watched him last summer. I watched him this year. I think he's a really, really good prospect. He's got great size. He's got physicality. He's got athleticism. He's got really good play speed and range to make plays all over the field. I think he's extremely versatile. There's no question on his tape. You saw him play post safety in cover 1 and cover 3. He can play half field safety in cover 2 and all the variations of cover 4. He's smooth. He's fluid. He can change direction. He's physical. I think he's a really smart, savvy player. I really liked Cole Bishop's tape. And when the Bills drafted him, when I saw the pick, I said, well, that's a really, really good pick. It would not surprise me, given that he's played a lot of football, if he's a starter as a rookie. Now, I'm not saying that he is. No one knows the answer to these questions. I'm just saying it wouldn't surprise me.
And you talk about, at a spot of need as well. I mean, with Poyer and Hyde both out the door, having a young guy with the same kind of skill set, being able to be physical up inside like Poyer was, and also being able to play every ramification of defense. I mean, how wide a variety of defenses did he play at Utah?
He played a bunch. Utah did a lot of stuff, by the way. They got a really good D coordinator for college football. I forget his name, but I saw Utah play a lot, and obviously I saw a lot of Cole Bishop's tape. But you're dealing with a guy that's 6'2", 206, ran really well. I think my sense is he probably tested a lot better than people thought because his vertical jump was tremendous. The only negative about him, and it's really weird given his size, is his arms are really short. Now, again, different coaches view that in different ways, but his arm length is really short relative to his overall size.
Yeah, I did see that. Morgan Scalley, the DC at Utah.
Yeah, there you go. I think they do a really, really good job. Just like I said, I'm not breaking down all their schemes, but Utah's got a lot of defensive players the last couple of years, and they do a really good job. They're not one of those vanilla defenses that just lines up and plays. They do a lot of stuff.
Guy that they took next may have the highest football IQ of the entire class. Dwayne Carter from Duke, not exactly off the charts measurables, but proven production here.
Yeah, and I think you're dealing with a guy that's scheme and front versatile. He's got pretty good off the ball quickness. He's got natural power. Those traits translate to, whether you're playing an even front, an odd front. He can play really in any 4-man D-line front. He's a tackle, not an end, even though he played a lot on the outside at Duke. He won't do that in the NFL. He's just over 6'2", 302. I think his game is built more on leverage and power. He can execute that power profile from multiple alignments across the defensive front. You wouldn't say he's a sudden explosive athlete. He's not necessarily going to win with flexibility and bend and short space explosiveness, but I think that there's just a consistency to his game. He's physical, he's powerful, and normally power translates. So I wouldn't expect him early on to be anything more than a rotational player, and he's not going to be a high sack guy. But he's a smart player, and he's got that power profile that, as I said, usually transitions well.
One of the things that I think a little bit of an unexpected pick was Ray Davis out of Kentucky, the running back. The Bills have two quality guys in their stable, but getting in the fourth round, and to me, they picked a couple of guys in the third round at running back, and now to just go fourth 1 round later to get a running back, it says a little something about what they expect from this guy.
I liked Ray Davis a lot. He was the guy that I remember when he was at Vanderbilt, and then he transferred to Kentucky. He's short, but he's not small. He's 211 pounds at just over 5'8". He packs a lot of quickness and power in that stout, compact frame. He's got explosive short area burst. He's not a long speed guy, but they have that. So, he's a one-cut downhill runner in the zone run game, and he worked really effectively off the puller wrapper blocks in the gap scheme run game. He's physical. He's got a low center of gravity, a really strong lower half. He can run through tackles. Really good leg drive, contact balance. You wouldn't, like I said, he's not explosive, but there's kind of an efficient smoothness to the way he runs. I think that he just has a great feel for navigating space at the second and third levels. He actually was a really good receiver too in college, but I don't think they drafted him for that purpose. But I kind of liked him. I didn't know that much about him, other than I remember during the season he had that ridiculous game. I think it was against Florida where he rushed for 280 or something like that.
Yeah.
But I kind of liked him when I watched his tape. He was really an intriguing guy to me.
Yeah, he led Kentucky in receiving touchdowns last year. I mean, he's
good
got
receiver,
hands.
Brownie. I mean, and he caught some vertical throws. I remember one where he worked through the line of scrimmage and then ran kind of a rail route and caught a touchdown. I forget who that was against, but it might have been Louisville, if memory serves me correctly. But he was a really good receiver.
Yeah. Next up was the center from Georgia. Brandon Beane revealed to us that he sent Aaron Cromer down there to work him out. And even though he played only center at Georgia his entire career, he said Cromer thinks he could offer some guard position flex. But why don't you tell us what your thoughts were on Van Pran-Granger?
And I could see that. He is over 6'4". He was 298 at the combine. I'm sure that will increase in the NFL. You're dealing with a guy that's played a lot of football, 43 starts for Georgia. That's pretty high-level competition, obviously. I thought he was a really efficient player. I thought he was just good as a run blocker and pass protector. I thought he had natural leverage, good play strength. Thought he understood how to use his hands. The more I watched him, and of course you always watch a lot of Georgia. I see a ton of SEC games just because they have so many players in the entire conference. The more I liked him. I thought he was one of the better offensive center prospects in the draft class. I thought his game was built more on sort of physicality, competitive toughness. I wouldn't call him a great athlete. I wouldn't say he has great movement, but he does have enough functional lateral quickness. He could climb to the second level enough in the run game. I just think these kinds of guys, to me, and guys, I'm not an offensive line guru by any means, but I think guys like this play in the league, and very often they start.
Okay.
Right. Give us an idea about the Ed Ulofoshio.
Oh, he was a fun guy to watch. He was on a Washington defense that was had a bunch of players as well. Now this is a guy that's more of an athlete than a physical player. When you watch him play, I think that there are a lot of linebackers in the league like that now. He sort of fits the profile of the will linebacker in a base 4-3, which of course we know they play a base 4-3. From an athletic traits perspective, you're dealing with a guy that is athletic. He can move. He's got lateral quickness in the box. There are times he looks sudden and explosive in a short space. He had a good feel for navigating through traffic. I think that he played physically, but not powerfully. And there's a difference. In other words, he didn't shy away from being physical, but he's not a really powerful human being. So when you talk about the stack and shed element, that's something he would need to work on. I think there were times I felt that he didn't see things as clearly as you need to. Again, I don't know if that's a fixable thing or not. It's probably why, given his production, that he's a later round pick. But he certainly has the athletic and movement traits to develop into a starting will linebacker. But there are elements of his game that need to be improved and refined before he could reach that level.
Yeah, he was an interesting case study, especially with the injury history as well. Then we got the guy who led the FBS in sacks last year, Javon Solomon from Troy, and we know Troy has a history of producing some pretty good edge rushers in the NFL. This guy is kind of short, but he's got long arms, Greg.
Yeah. He was another fun guy to watch. When the Bills picks came up, I was like, oh, great. I've seen these guys, and I kind of like watching them. This guy plays with such high level intensity and competitiveness snap after snap. I said he would find a place in the NFL despite not possessing some of the critical factors many teams look for in edge rushers. And you just hit on one, Brownie. I mean, he's only 6'1". He's 246. His athletic testing measurables were good, but not off the charts. But he does have really long arms, about 34 inches. But he's got a compact frame. And I thought that, the way he played at Troy this year, I don't think he's going to play like that in the NFL. They used him a lot as a 4 technique. He lined up over tackles. I mean, I think in the NFL, he's really an edge player who's going to play outside the tackle. I think he was a really interesting guy. He's got first step explosiveness. He can carry that burst and speed through the runway and around the edge. He beat offensive tackles on the high side. He does have that motorcycle lean off the edge, that body flexibility. He's going to need to develop more counter moves and more refinement. Obviously, most pass rushers need to do that. But he was a fun watch and a really interesting guy.
Yeah, he seems to be really slippery off the edge, like a river running around a rock, right? I mean, it's hard to get really good solid contact on him. It looks like when you watch offensive linemen try to block him.
Yeah, and he was so first step explosive, Steve, that a lot of times these tackles, and again, he played at Troy, so we're not going to sit here and say that that's going to translate exactly because he wasn't necessarily playing against NFL offensive tackles, and we all know you need more than just that in the NFL, just, winning on the high side, beating guys off the edge. You need more than that to be an NFL pass rusher. But there's an explosive element to his game. It was kind of an interesting pick because normally they've gone for bigger guys on the D line in terms of height.
Yeah,
and here they
longer.
drafted a guy that's shorter, clearer. He doesn't meet sort of the physical measurables that they normally look for.
Yeah, right. And you wonder if they feel like the long arms can make up for something. But, yeah, I mean, I kind of thought from time to time he would get uprooted in the run game, too. So he might just be a situational pass rusher.
But, yeah, I'll tell you one thing, Brownie. He did at times, but he fought and he battled. In other words, he didn't just get moved where easily. There were times, obviously, he did get moved to some degree just because he's only 246. But he battled. He competed.
Yeah, and I think that you look at some of these later picks like we just touched on, Ulofoshio and Solomon, these are two guys with longer arms, at the edge/linebacker position, and I wonder if they're thinking about the new kickoff as well. Longer arms will help you there too, and so it kind of got me thinking about that. Last guy we wanted to cover with you was the Penn State nickel corner, Daequan Hardy, who is probably going to be Taron Johnson's backup, but he might get on the field because knowing Deontay Hardy isn't here anymore, this guy is going to have a good look at the punt return job.
I would say that's absolutely true. Because as a corner, he's a slot. That's where he predominantly played because he's undersized. He's got athleticism. He's got movement. That's his game. He's actually a good blitzer off the slot if he has to play there. He's a twitchy athlete. Obviously Johnson's one of the better slot corners in the league, but if by chance he were to get hurt, Hardy has played there. He's best suited there. But I agree with you. I think that the special teams element of his game is really, really important. I mean, I think this past year he averaged about 15 yards a punt return, and that's pretty good in any league.
Yeah, I mean, he had 2 in one game for touchdowns. Granted, it was against UMass, but that's not easy to do. I mean, 2 punt return touchdowns in the same game. So that's something. And he's like 4.38, right? He's 4.38 speed, I think, is what he timed.
Yeah, no, I believe you're right, and he can run for sure. What people have to understand, I hope, is that when you get later in the draft, there's reasons why guys get picked later. Now, again, do some guys make it? And no one's right all the time. Sometimes, you know how it goes. A guy makes it as a 6th-round pick, and everybody says, "Oh, how come people didn't know that?" Well, that happens sometimes. But more often than not, there's reasons why these guys get drafted where they are. And if they make it, there's a lot of variables that go into play. It's like the linebacker from Washington. I kind of liked his tape, but if he didn't make it, I would understand why he didn't make it. If Solomon doesn't make it, I would understand why. But on the other hand, I think they have traits in which they could make it depending on how they're deployed and the situation.
All right, one last thing before I let you go, Greg. We get back to the top of this draft and how this unfolded. And the Bills traded back twice, once with Kansas City and then once more with Carolina.
Yeah.
And at the end of the first round, they're sitting there at 28, and there's only been 4 wide receivers taken. It was all the top 3, and then Brian Thomas Jr., right? So there's all these guys left, and the Bills are sitting there with their pick of the litter. They could have taken any of these guys they wanted, and they chose to drop back twice in order, and then they got Keon Coleman. What does that say about the value they place on all those guys? You throw them into a bucket, take the best one out of there, because right around where the Bills didn't pick, you had Worthy go off the board, to Kansas City. Then you had Ricky Pearsall and Xavier Legette go off, and then the Bills still have their pick between Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, and Jalen Polk. I mean, all 3 of those guys are still on the board. So what does it say to you when they get back to the 28th pick and all those guys are still on the board that they decide to trade back twice?
Well, first of all, teams have a really good feel for what other teams are going to do, number one. And number 2, it tells you that they wanted Coleman. And people can debate that all day long, but we don't know what their draft board is. Fans might think, Worthy's better, this guy's better. Well, obviously the Bills didn't think so. They thought that Coleman was the guy they wanted. And they knew that the Chiefs were not going to take Coleman because he doesn't really fit what Andy Reid normally does. And they knew that the 49ers were not going to take Coleman because they sort of have that kind of receiver. So they kind of knew that Coleman would be there because that was the first pick of the second day, was it not?
Right.
Yeah. They kind of knew based on all the things. I mean, I talk to coaches at the combine, and they know all these things about every coach in the league. That's the way it works. They know each other, so they kind of knew what was going to happen. So it tells you that in their mind, Coleman was the guy. And it's funny, when I was on the field at the combine, and there are coaches who lead the drills. I talked to one wide receiver coach who absolutely loved Coleman. He had him really high. I talked to, by the way, just to show you how different it is, with different coaches. I talked to a coach last week, before the draft, who's been in the league 30 years. Okay, he had A.D. Mitchell, who didn't go until the second round. Probably because there's some concerns about character. He had A.D. Mitchell ahead of Adunze on his board. So there's all kinds of different boards, and when people say, oh, well, they blew it, they should have done this, those are just comments. They don't mean anything. We don't know what anybody's board looks like. And clearly the Bills knew that Coleman would be there, and that's the guy they wanted. Now we just have to wait and see what happens. Nobody knows the answer to that either.
Greg, thanks as always for all your help this season and in the off season. Enjoy your summer. We'll catch up with you in the fall.
It's funny, Brownie. I was thinking the other day that it just doesn't seem that far off that training camp's going to be here.
It's a 12-month season, and that's all there is to it. It's a year-round season.
All right, guys, I love it as always. Thanks for having me.
Thanks,
Greg.
Greg.
Sure thing, Greg. Take care.